My fiancée once told me she needed more time. The way she said it, calm and casual over a half-empty glass of Chardonnay, sounded almost rehearsed. I smiled politely, as if I agreed, but inside my chest something shifted. A decision, sharp and unshakable, took root. I didn't argue, I didn't beg, and I certainly didn't try to persuade her otherwise. I just leaned back in my chair, nodded, and whispered, "Of course, take all the time you need." What she didn't know was that in that exact moment she stopped being my future. She had asked me to wait, and I would, but not in the way she imagined. A week later, my entire digital presence was gone. Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, deleted. Emails erased. Even my phone number vanished into oblivion. To everyone who once knew me, it was as if I had evaporated, and, in a way, I had. But let me backtrack to the night it happened. We were sitting in our usual corner of La Fontana, the Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated anniversaries and birthdays for years. I'd chosen it deliberately that evening because it was supposed to be the place where we finalized our wedding catering. Instead, it became the stage for her performance, a script I never knew she'd been rehearsing in her head. She set down her fork, glanced at her friends across the table, then looked back at me with an expression that was equal parts serious and theatrical. "Nathan, I just feel like things are rushing. We've been together so long, but now that the wedding is near, I don't know if I'm ready to commit." Her voice was soft but carried enough weight to silence the table. 5 years together, 7 months engaged, a wedding just 90 days away, a shared home, well, my home, really, her name scribbled only on a secondary credit card I paid for. I had built everything around us, brick by brick, believing we were heading toward the same future. And here she was, talking about pressing pause. "So, are you calling off the wedding?" I asked. My tone was even, but it felt like someone else's voice left my throat. She reached across the table quickly, shaking her head, as if she hadn't meant for it to sound so severe. No, not calling it off. Just a pause. I need space to be certain. You know I love you. Can you do that for me? Can you wait?" Her friends, Claire and Madison, jumped in with nods and sympathetic glances. Claire leaned toward me, her tone dripping with reassurance. "It's normal, Nate. Lots of women get cold feet. Just give her breathing room." I studied her face. She wore sincerity like a mask, but her eyes betrayed her. They weren't the eyes of someone confused. They were the eyes of someone testing boundaries. She wanted stability without responsibility, a title without sacrifice. She wanted the ring and the status of a fiancé, but she also wanted freedom. Freedom to indulge. Freedom to wander. She didn't want space. She wanted a net. And in that suffocating silence, the kind where the world itself seems to hold its breath, I understood. This wasn't hesitation. It was strategy. So I gave her what she asked for. I smiled faintly, withdrew my hand from hers and whispered, "Of course. I'll wait." Her relief was instantaneous. She squeezed my arm and kissed my cheek, glowing with gratitude. "You're the best. I knew you'd understand." The rest of the dinner turned into a grotesque parody of celebration. Her friends giggled about a spontaneous girls' trip to Ibiza, conveniently scheduled for the very weekend that was supposed to be our wedding, a little vacation to find themselves. And there I was, the generous fool, footing the bill for overpriced cocktails, nodding along as they planned a party atop the ashes of my future. But my nod wasn't agreement. It was calculation. That night, when I returned to the house, my house, the stillness felt different. It wasn't grief, it wasn't rage, it was clarity, a razor-sharp calmness that guided every move I made from then on. If she wanted me to wait, I would wait in the only way that mattered, by removing myself from her reach entirely. The first thing I did was financial. For 2 years I had been building a side project, an AI-driven software tool. 3 weeks earlier, it had been acquired by a multinational firm. The payout was life-changing, a number with more zeros than Sarah could even imagine. And in hindsight, it was obvious. That windfall had been the spark for her sudden doubts. She thought she had leverage. She thought she had options. So I stripped that illusion bare. With one phone call, I had the funds transferred into a fortress of trusts and offshore accounts. Secure, invisible, untouchable. Her supplementary card? Canceled. The joint account? Closed. The car I'd bought her 2 birthdays ago? Re-registered in my name. Then I went digital. Every photo, every trace, every piece of my online identity erased, socials deleted, phone number changed, even my cloud storage wiped. To the outside world, I had ceased to exist. Finally, I moved on to the physical. I packed one suitcase, not with clothes, but with hard drives, legal documents, and the essentials of my work. Walking through the house one last time felt surreal. Her clothes still hung in the closet, her perfumes lined the vanity, little trinkets scattered across shelves. I didn't touch any of it. I just stared at it all, like artifacts in a museum of a life that was already gone. I left one note on the kitchen counter. 3 words, nothing more. I'll wait. Then I drove to the airport, bought a one-way first-class ticket to Southeast Asia, and disappeared. By the time she woke up the next morning, probably glowing from the fantasy of newfound independence, I was already a ghost on the other side of the world. 6 weeks later, I was sipping espresso on the balcony of a villa perched above the cliffs of southern Thailand. The air smelled of salt and jasmine. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, and for the first time in years, I felt light. No more wedding deadlines, no more half-hearted reassurances, no more pretending not to notice the subtle ways she was already drifting away. Just silence, waves, and the hum of a new life. I would have been content to let the past rot behind me, but the universe has a way of sending updates whether you ask for them or not. Mine came weekly, through my younger brother Daniel, the only person who knew where I had gone. His calls painted the kind of picture that would have been tragic if it weren't so predictable. According to him, the first week was everything Sarah had dreamed of. She told anyone who asked that I was giving her space, and her friends applauded her for being brave enough to voice her needs. She and her entourage celebrated nightly, racking up absurd bills on the credit card that had already quietly died in my pocket. But reality always arrives sooner than expected. The first crack appeared on a Friday evening. Sarah, planning another night out, tried to buy a designer dress. Declined. She tried another card. Declined again. Panic set in. She dialed the bank only to be informed that the supplementary card had been terminated by the primary holder, me. She called Daniel in a frenzy. "Do you know what's happening?" "Did Nathan say anything?" "He played dumb, as I'd asked him to." "I don't know, Sarah." "Maybe you should ask him." "I can't reach him," she screamed. "He's not answering. His number's dead." Her panic snowballed into desperation. By the weekend, she was calling me incessantly, or trying to, at least. Her texts went undelivered, calls redirected to a hollow disconnect message. Then she checked social media. That was the breaking point. My existence had been scrubbed clean. Week 2 brought a shift in her strategy. She began messaging our mutual friends. At first, it was casual. "Hey, have you heard from Nathan? He's just been distant, and I'm worried." But within days, the tone grew frantic. She claimed I was missing, that maybe something had happened to me, that she was terrified. Some believed her, at least for a while. Her parents even filed a missing persons report. Police came to my house, saw the missing car and suitcase, and concluded, correctly, that I'd left voluntarily. No crime, no foul play, just absence. And that's when her performance really began to unravel. Daniel told me about the day she unlocked the front door of my house, expecting to find me sulking in the dark, waiting for her epiphany. Instead, she found silence. My computer's gone, my suitcase gone, and a single piece of paper waiting for her on the counter. 3 words. "I'll wait." Daniel said she called him hysterical, voice breaking through sobs. "What does that mean?" "Wait for what? Where is he?" His answer was perfect. Calm, steady, unyielding. "I guess he's waiting for you to figure it out, Sarah." Isn't that what you wanted? By week 3, the fallout had escalated into catastrophe. The car I'd gifted her 2 years earlier? Repossessed. Her parents had to cover her massive tab from that single week of freedom. Claire and Madison, her loyal co-stars, began to retreat. What had once been fun drama was now a liability. She showed up at my old office. No one knew where I was. I'd quit the moment the acquisition deal cleared. She tried my parents' house, too. My father made sure she left with no illusions. And then the social tide turned. By the end of the first month, the story had shifted. No one saw her as the anxious bride anymore. She was the woman who gambled away everything on entitlement and lost spectacularly. The whispers spread. She fumbled the bag. She played too many games. She asked for space, and he gave her silence. It was brutal, but it was true. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, I was alive in a way I hadn't been in years. He had always prided himself on his discipline, on the precision with which he orchestrated every element of his life. But this unfolding storm of betrayal and disillusionment was not something he had accounted for in his meticulous plans. His carefully charted map of the future suddenly seemed blurred, the compass spinning wildly, as if mocking his faith in structure. That evening he stood by the window of his apartment, watching the city lights flicker like restless stars scattered across the earth. Each glow seemed to whisper of other lives being lived, lives filled with their own secrets, joys, and failures. He wondered if anyone else at that very moment was staring into the night, feeling the sting of betrayal carved deep into their chest. The silence of his apartment weighed heavily on him. He could still hear her laughter from earlier in the day echoing faintly in his memory. But in that echo there was no warmth left. It had become hollow, brittle, poisoned by everything he now knew. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, watching the amber liquid swirl in the glass, then set it down untouched. Numbing the pain wasn't the answer. Instead, he found himself driven by a strange clarity. If this chapter of his life had been built on lies, then it was not merely a wound, but a chance to rebuild, to strip everything back to its foundations and construct something unshakable. Not with her, perhaps not with anyone, for the moment, but with himself. The next morning, he rose early, as he always did, but instead of following his routine blindly, he rewrote it. He pushed his body harder in the gym, every drop of sweat a silent vow. He restructured his workday, throwing himself into projects he had once delayed. Each task completed became a small victory, a proof that he was not defined by her actions nor by her indifference. But healing wasn't only about discipline. It was also about understanding, about facing the questions he had avoided asking himself. Why had he ignored the subtle warnings? Why had he placed his happiness entirely in the hands of another, blind to the danger of such dependence? These questions cut deep, but he refused to shy away. He wrote them down, one by one, in a journal. At first, the words felt jagged, raw, but gradually the act of writing became liberating, as though he was untangling knots that had long been strangling him. And in that act of reflection, he began to see a truth he had overlooked. The betrayal was not simply an end. It was a brutal but necessary teacher. It was showing him the limits of trust misplaced, the risks of love unbalanced, and the unspoken need for self-respect above all else. Days turned into weeks, and though the sting of her absence still pulsed in the background of his thoughts, he no longer felt paralyzed by it. He saw her name light up his phone more than once, unanswered. He knew what those messages might contain. Apologies, excuses, perhaps even attempts at reconciliation. But the man who once would have clung desperately to those crumbs of attention no longer existed. Instead, he met with friends he had neglected, reconnected with the world outside the narrow orbit of their relationship. He found himself standing taller, speaking with a confidence he hadn't realized he'd lost. And though he never said it aloud, deep inside he knew. The betrayal that once felt like it might break him had, in truth, remade him. The city continued to pulse around him, its endless noise, its chaos, its unpredictability. But now, instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt in rhythm with it, stronger, sharper, ready. One night, as he walked through the crowded streets, neon lights washing over him in a blur of colors, he realized something profound. The betrayal had not stolen his power. It had revealed it. In losing the future he had once imagined with her, he had discovered the freedom to imagine something greater. He passed by cafes filled with laughter, couples leaning close across tables, and for the first time in weeks he didn't feel the sharp twist of envy or bitterness. Instead, he felt a quiet acceptance. Love, he knew now, was never a guarantee. It could be beautiful, intoxicating, and yet fragile, fleeting. But self-respect, self-mastery, that was unshakable. It was then that he began to make promises, not to her, not to anyone else, but to himself. He promised never again to ignore the whispers of his own intuition, those subtle warnings he had once dismissed in the name of love. He promised never again to shrink himself to fit into someone else's vision of happiness. And above all, he promised to keep building a life so solid, so rich with purpose, that no betrayal could ever topple it again. From that night on, he pursued growth with a hunger that surprised even him. He devoured books on philosophy and psychology, searching for answers not only to his own questions, but to the universal struggles of the human heart. He listened to stories of others who had been broken and rebuilt, who had turned their pain into power. Slowly, he began to share his own story too, not as a plea for sympathy, but as a testament to resilience. When colleagues asked why he suddenly seemed sharper, more focused, he simply smiled and said, "I learned the hard way that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is the only way to find what you truly need." The transformation was not instant, nor was it without setbacks. There were nights when memories came back to haunt him, when he replayed her words, her laughter, the sting of her disloyalty. But instead of drowning in them, he used them as fuel. Every pang of pain was proof that he was still alive, still fighting, still moving forward. And then, one morning, as he watched the sunrise spill gold across the horizon, he understood the final lesson. The betrayal was not the defining moment of his story. It was only the spark that lit a fire he had carried within him all along, a fire of ambition, of strength, of an unshakable will to rise. Where once he had thought of himself as a man undone, now he saw himself as a man reborn. Not despite the betrayal, but because of it. He smiled, not at the past, not at her, but at himself. For he had walked through the storm, and on the other side, he had found not despair, but clarity. And clarity, he realized, was the greatest gift life could give. Months later, his life looked nothing like the fragile world he had once built around her. His career had flourished, his health had reached a new peak, and his circle of friends had grown stronger. But the greatest change was within. The unshakable calm in his chest, the quiet certainty that no one could ever take away what he had built for himself. Sometimes he still thought of her, but not with anger. Instead, he regarded those memories as one might regard a scar, a reminder of a wound that had once bled, but had healed into something tougher than before. The scar did not define him. It testified to his survival. One evening, as he stood on a balcony overlooking the city, the wind carrying the hum of life below, he reflected on the man he had become. The betrayal that once threatened to destroy him had instead carved him into someone sharper, wiser, and infinitely more resilient. And he knew, deep down, that life would throw more storms his way, more tests, more trials, more losses, but now he welcomed them, because every storm carried within it an opportunity, not just to endure, but to rise. He whispered to himself, almost like a vow, "I will never again let someone else's weakness define my worth. My value is mine alone, and no matter what comes, I will stand." The city lights shimmered as if in agreement. Somewhere in the distance, laughter echoed, footsteps hurried, stories unfolded. And in that vast sea of lives, he felt not small, not broken, but limitless. Because the greatest betrayal had given him the greatest gift, the realization that he was unbreakable.